When you're reading something in a book, it's really easy to remove yourself from the situation and say, objectively, I know that it's wrong to be racist, for example. But it's not until you actually grapple with the fact that you may have unconsciously promoted racism, engaged in racist behavior, said racist things to a friend or a colleague without realizing that that behavior or statement was racist, that you can physically feel what that feels like in your body. That's why I think that caucusing is really effective in that way.
The idea behind caucusing is that it provides a space for people to come together to talk about identity in like identity spaces. So for example, we may separate by race, where white people get together with other white people to talk about what it means to be white, and then people of color talk about what does it mean to be a person of color, and in particular, a person of color as a teacher. In the secondary teacher education program, we ask students to identify themselves at the beginning of the program. And then we use that information to put them into groups. But it's very important that we allow students to self-identify into a particular group. We begin the program caucusing around race. And then in second quarter, we caucus around sexuality. And then in fall quarter, we move on to gender. We meet approximately weekly to caucus. And so in all during the program, we caucus 25 to 30 times.
For the group that I'm facilitating right now in the sexuality caucusing, and I'm facilitating the group of queer candidates, I think that they are thinking ahead to being a teacher who identifies as queer and what that means in terms of their teaching. Like, how are they going to be able to navigate how their identity intersects with that educational context and modeling that for their students.
One of the things we found in our research is that caucusing disrupts internalized oppression. So some students came in thinking of maybe a language that they spoke because they were an immigrant from another country was a deficit, but came out of caucusing realizing that was a strength. And then they started to unlearn dominant narratives about legitimacy and who they were. We also found that caucusing disrupted internalized dominance. Students were able to confront whiteness. They were able to examine their privileges within mixed identities as well. So we saw that when people of color went to the straight caucus in second quarter, they were able to understand how they had privilege in one space and less privilege in another space. We also found that students were better able to externalize their learning and disrupt their participation in systems. Students, when they're in the classroom, understood that there were moves they needed to make and actions they needed to take in order to not be complicit in systems of power, but instead disrupt those systems.